Hello everybody, my name is Bridget Squires, and today I'm going to be doing a presentation on talking to children about sex. Now, we all at some point in our life probably had that moment where our parents sat us down and decided to have a talk with us about sex. A lot of times though, people tend to use other terms for it, like the talk, birds and the bees, how babies are made, or other things that just kind of dance around the topic. But today we are going to talk about why it is important for parents to talk about sex with their children, be straightforward, and prevent misinformation. Now we're going to talk about why this is important. Why should parents talk to their kids about sex? Well, the first reason is it prevents misinformation. A lot of kids growing up who had their parents either not have a talk with them or give them a very vague idea of what sex is, grew up with a lot of misinformation and misideas about sex and relationships. This can cause a lot of stress, anxiety, and issues later on down the line when people don't really know how themselves work. Having a conversation with your kids also fosters open communication. Children should feel safe and open to be able to ask any questions that they have and talk to their parents about anything regarding their bodies, relationships, procreation, or anything along those lines. And having an adult that you trust that you can talk to about this type of stuff is very important when you're growing up. It also prepares children for life. Lots of things regarding puberty, relationships, any of that, those are all parts of life that everybody has to go through. And the more information you have and the more you can be prepared growing up, the more easier that time is going to be for you. Talking to your kids about these things also promotes healthy relationships because you can give them an idea of what a good relationship with clear boundaries and open communication should look like when they get older. When you talk to your kids, you also should teach them safety and consent, as many kids grow up not knowing about safe sex and all the dangers that can come with sexually transmitted diseases, unplanned pregnancies, and also kids should know that when they're getting older, boundaries and consent are very important, and those are things that should be emphasized. An interesting but startling statistic I found while researching this topic is that according to the American Societal Health Association, almost 50% of young people will or have contracted a sexually transmitted disease. Now, some of these tend to be more harmful than others, but people should always be careful of these things, and a big cause of young people contracting these is people not having enough information about safe sex or how to prevent those types of things. However, talking to your kids about these things isn't always easy, and that's for several reasons. First of all is a discomfort and awkwardness. Parents often see their kids as very young, innocent people, and having to talk to them about these more topics that are considered more adult having to talk to them about more adult type topics can be very difficult and awkward, especially having to explain things to your kids that you might not be comfortable explaining. There's also a concern for encouraging sexual behavior, as many parents believe that if your kids don't know about sex, then they won't do it, which ignores a lot of biological factors, and some people have even believed that not teaching about your kids about sex makes them more likely to engage in it. There is also a cultural and religious stigma surrounding it, which kind of goes with the other point. Just a lot of people think that those are types of things that kids shouldn't have on their mind. And of course, there obviously is a certain age point to this, but once children start reaching a certain age where they will have hormones and everything, the better that they understand about themselves, the more easy they'll be able to process those things. There's also emotional sensitivity, as learning about your body, sex, and puberty is a thing that happens as you're growing up, and for a lot of parents, acknowledging and understanding that their children are growing up can be very difficult. When looking into this topic, I found a really interesting quote from one of the authors, Amber Madison. It goes, "They are just words describing body parts, bodily functions, and a human's natural inclination to reproduce." This is pretty interesting because a lot of times when kids do learn about sex and puberty, it can be a very awkward and kind of shameful topic, and a lot of people end up feeling ashamed of their bodies, even for just feeling more natural type things. And I think it's supposed to remember, and I think it's important for parents to emphasize to their kids that these things are a natural part of life and shouldn't be considered shameful. Now, looking at talking to your kids about sex from a biblical perspective, there's a couple interesting points I found while looking into this. First of all, teaching your kids about sex in a Christian way First of all, teaching your kids about sex in a Christian way before the world teaches them. This is actually a saying I've kind of heard a lot, which is usually directed towards Christian parents who are hesitant to talk to their kids about these things. But the fact is that, especially kids who grow up and go to public school, are going to hear about things regarding sex eventually. And if they don't hear it from you first, they might hear it in a different, less healthy way. Especially now with the internet, we've seen a lot more of this. Also, it's important to emphasize that our bodies are fearfully and wonderfully made by God. That kind of goes what I was talking about, where a lot of parents, when they talk to their kids, they can leave them feeling shameful about their bodies. But it's important to encourage body positivity among kids and help them understand that God created them the way they are, and they shouldn't be ashamed of any of that. It's also important to show kids what a good, healthy Christian relationship should look like. This can be done by example, but should also be explained to kids as they're growing up and especially reaching the age where they will start being in relationships of their own. As I mentioned before, talking about sex with your kids as a parent isn't really easy. So I think it's important to look at what, after my research, I have deemed is the 3 most important goals to have when talking to your kids about this. The first is giving them an understanding of how their body works. Generally, when parents have this talk with their kids, it tends to be around the time when children are reaching puberty. And this can be a very confusing and honestly quite scary time for many kids. So it's important for parents to help children and young teens understand what is going on with their body and how everything operates. Because the less confusion and misunderstandings that people have, the easier these things will be growing up. The second thing is help them know how to set boundaries and what a healthy relationship should look like. Again, I touched on this a little bit in the biblical part of this, but it is really important for children to have a good understanding of what relationships can look like, so that they are able to avoid situations where they would be in an unhealthy relationship. Even when kids are younger and don't have a full understanding about sex or relationships, they still should understand healthy boundaries in any relationship for their own safety. This is also why it's important for children to have open communication with their parents at all ages. On the topic of safety, it's also important to teach health and safety and promote good lifestyle choices. As I mentioned earlier, there has been a huge problem with sexually transmitted diseases among young people. This is why it's really important for children to understand the risks that can come with sex and how they can be prevented in a healthy way. Coming from a Christian perspective, children should have an understanding of the value of their own body and the importance of making good life choices. Wrapping this up, I just want to go over some final tips when teaching your kids about their bodies and sexual relationships based on the research that I did in this topic. First of all, having different age-appropriate talks with your kids throughout their lives. Many things I have read actually recommend that rather than having one specific talk with your kids at a time, it's important to have different talks with them throughout life based on the life stage that they're at. Next, it is important to be ready for any questions that your kids might have, because kids are naturally curious and are going to have a lot of questions, and it's important to encourage them to be able to come to you with any questions that they have in order to have that open communication. It is also important to emphasize the seriousness of these topics, because when talking to your kids about sex, they should be aware that this isn't something that should be taken lightly. And it is okay to caution your kids about things and explain to them the severity of certain situations without freaking them out. And finally, it is very important to create open communication in an environment where your child feels safe to talk to you. Alright, and here are my sources. Thank you so much for watching my presentation.